Good evening, everyone. My name is Jill Zippin, and I am Chairwoman of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania, and welcome to our voter education and registration event tonight. Democratic Jewish Outreach, for those of you who don't know, is a federal PAC that works to elect Democrats across the state of Pennsylvania. This year, we're involved in the governor's race, and we've recently endorsed Josh Shapiro for governor, and hopefully he will be winning that race with our support in 2022. We have three wonderful speakers for you tonight. We have Mitch Cates, who's the senior advisor to the Pennsylvania Democratic Party, Kadita Kenner, the executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project. And unfortunately, Andrea Koplov was unable to be here tonight, but we have Jamie Parapato, who's the executive director of Term PA Blue and one of its co-founders. I would also like to thank our board member, Martin Raffel, who was instrumental in arranging all of these speakers tonight. So thank you very much, Martin. I'm going to allow the speakers to tell you about themselves and their organizations, what they have done, what they will be doing, and what we all can do to ensure a victory as we approach 2022 for the Democrats, how to register more voters, and how to get out the vote across the state of Pennsylvania. I will begin with Jamie Parapato. So Jamie, you can begin.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I apologize for not being Andrea. Term P Blue started. We're about to have our 5th year anniversary in January. So yeah, 5 years since we got started. I guess you can say in the beginning, we started trying to activate all these people who are so heartbroken over the election to Trump and put them to work and we were focused on flipping the state legislature, as I don't have to tell anybody on this call. We have a very, very Republican legislature. This isn't a reasonable Republican legislature. This is a cuckoo banana Republican legislature. So we made great strides, and I think we were doing really well. And then COVID hit. And I think, a lot of things changed with COVID. And I think it also had a lot of effect on voting and how people live. And so what we do at Term PA Blue is we have to win elections. We have to win elections for any of this to matter, because, the Republicans are passing bills as bad as they are in Texas, but we have a governor that will veto them. And what they're coming after, first and foremost, is voting. And that's what they want to do. And they want to silence voices. So, it is cyclical, but if we do not get we don't get Democrats elected, we're going to get our voting rights chiseled away smaller and smaller and smaller all the time, because that is their goal. So we do whatever we can to help candidates get elected. And literally it has become whatever we can. We send millions of texts, we phone bank, we canvass, we want to make political volunteering accessible to people. You don't have to have a PhD in political science. You don't have to read, the New York Times cover to cover. You have to have a story. You have to care about this. You have to mean something. We'll teach you the fussy parts. It doesn't matter. Our voices are what matters. And we want to make sure everybody has the tools they need to use their voice to help, to help us save as many people as possible and protect as many people as possible. Oh, now Jill's muted.
Sorry about that. Next up, we have Kadita Kenner of the New Pennsylvania Project. She's going to tell you a little bit about herself, her organization, and what they will be doing in the coming year.
Thank you, Jill. Good evening, everybody. Good to see your faces. Kadita Kenner, Executive Director of the New Pennsylvania Project. We're the new kids on the block. And our organization is named in homage to the New Georgia Project. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the New Georgia Project. Maybe you heard of someone named Stacey Abrams, and you know that an organization that was founded in 2014 to knock on doors, meet people where they are, talk about issues, not talk about political parties or candidates, but actually talk about the issues. In 2014, it was the ACA. In 2021, with the New Pennsylvania Project, it's going to be the ARP, the American Rescue Plan. We're talking about those issues currently at the doors. We have 5 regions in which we're focusing on going into 2022. So you'll see a lot of our time will be spent in Dauphin, Cumberland County. We'll spend a lot of time in the Allegheny suburbs. We'll spend a lot of time in the SEPA cities, the southeastern Pennsylvania cities, Chester, Norristown, Coatesville. We'll be in Monroe and Northampton. And, in Bucks County, some parts of Bucks County. And so it's really a big focus of ours as a voting rights organization with a primary purpose of voter registration to meet people where they are and get these folks who have been disenfranchised and disengaged in the political process for far too long, engaged again. So many of us joining this evening's call, we're used to having our needs met. And the doors that we're knocking on are constituents who are not used to having their needs met. They don't see how voting in elections is making their lives any better. And these are folks who have cast ballots previously or have never cast ballots. We've registered folks who are in their 60s who are voting for the first time in their lives. And we're doing this because we're meeting them where they are and talking to them about issues. And, along with the ARP, it's also the raise in the minimum wage. We're stuck here in Pennsylvania with the lowest minimum wage in the country at $7.25 an hour, which is disgusting. We have other issues. We know that the 2022 election will be a very crucial election. Every year we say this is the most important election. I'm going to say it again, 2022, the most important election. We know that if we do not maintain the governor's residence, what could actually happen to Pennsylvanians? They would change the way in which our election law works, the way in which we even have perhaps a Secretary of State. They would like to move that into an elected position versus an appointed position. You see already what they're trying to do with House Bill 1800. They're trying to take back everything that was good about Act 77, which gave us the access to the ballot by voting by mail, which has been very successful and helpful in these times as we're still battling a global pandemic. And so the New Pennsylvania Project is all about meeting people where they are, particularly communities of color and youth voters, and getting them involved in the political process and talking about the issues that matter to them at the doors, doing a lot of listening versus a lot of talking to find out what it is that's going to move these folks to the polls and vote twice a year, every year, because we need these communities to be super voters in order for them to get their needs met. So that's what we're all about at the New Pennsylvania Project, and I look forward to talking to you all a little later.
Great. And last but not least, we have Mitch Cates, who is the Senior Advisor to the Democratic Party. Go ahead, Mitch.
Thanks, Jill. Hey, folks, it's great to be back with this group. I love the group. I love this energy. You all always show up and work hard and do your part to help with democracy. Some of you we've talked before. My brief background, I've been doing this a long time. I guess that's why I have no hair left. I'm gray and I'm a senior advisor now and no longer a young kid banging on doors, although I still bang on doors. I've been blessed to work on some pretty interesting races in many states, from Boston to the fakakta state of Florida, and was even sent overseas to work in some former Soviet countries, and was a part of a campaign that overthrew a government in Georgia, where I could see Russia from my kitchen, that Georgia. So I'm really happy to be back in Pennsylvania. I live in Pittsburgh. I went back into the state party last year, well, the middle of the 2020 cycle, which was a very unusual campaign. But this year we just went through a whole election cycle. I will tell you that while no one's satisfied or happy with all of the results that happened in this election cycle, I think people should keep their heads up and be proud of the fact that we did have some significant wins in down ballot races, especially while the Looney Tunes were pushing critical race theory. We had plenty of people that were fighting hard in the trenches. We won some races in some districts where Democrats have never won before, taking on the challenges of things like critical race theory. Northern Allegheny, we had the top two finishers in that school board race, and Democrats had never sat on that school board. And that's the district where that nutball Mike Turzai is from, who's now about to run for governor. In the Central York district, where they banned books that had anything to do with African Americans or African American history, we booted out the woman who started that nonsense. And we won, I think, 3 or 4 of those seats, which is a remarkable feat. And that came from a lot of hard work from a lot of people. Some of the things that that we did at the state party this year, there were many firsts. One of them first is we stopped with the nonsense of only focusing on 12 or 13 Democratic counties. And we truly did do outreach into all 67 counties. If that's one of the most significant things that we could do as not just our organization, but for all of us. States like Florida are suffering because they do the same thing, where they only focus on 12 or 13 Democratic counties, and they do virtually no organizing in other regions or rural areas. And we put a stop to that this year. And one of the things that I love about what we do is we work with folks like Jamie Parapato, and I can't wait to work with Khadija in the trenches, working together. We have some amazing organizations in addition to the state party and your organization. We work together too to help, do everything that we can to get people elected. For the first time in the history of the state party, something so simple as a slate card that had our statewide candidates on one side, and every county, we had their countywide candidates. And for those of you that live in counties like Delco and Chester, we did versions of those slate cards that went all the way down to school board and townships. And we did that in other parts of Pennsylvania too. We had a very active, and I'm going to encourage you all to join our digital organizing channel on our PA-Dem Slack channel, which I'll put up. Jamie Parapato and Turn PA Blue also have an active Slack channel. We all need to stay connected that way. That's the best way to get information from messaging to action items. And our team has grown a lot. We had help from outside of Pennsylvania. Once Virginia and California ended, we saw a lot of help coming that way. We are the #1 battleground state in the country. I don't care what any other battleground state says. We're the #1 state, right? We have an open governor's race, an open US Senate race. We're going to have new congressional districts. We're losing a congressional seat because of population decrease. We have a lot of work to do. We're in the middle of redistricting. Our lines are going to look different. Personally, I think we're going to have a hell of a lot more competitive state house and state Senate races. And Lord knows Jamie Parapato is sharpening up her knives, ready to go after those things, because we have to take back the state legislature, because God forbid we go one more session with those lunatics in charge going after women's rights. And as Khadija pointed out, voting rights, which is unbelievable. We all have to work together to get the fight done. And I am so glad that we're talking about voter registration, because there isn't a person on this Zoom call right now that doesn't know or realize that we all have to, raise our game and bring it up to get more voter registration done. And I know that like one of the things that we're doing, I'll say this real quick. We've been building out a coordinated campaign since earlier this year. Usually what happens is we don't start a state party doesn't build a coordinated campaign until into the new year. Well, we already have people on the ground, and we're actively building that out, rapidly building it out, so that there's more community engagement now, instead of showing up and saying, hey, vote for our people, right? Khadija is going to be the one that shares, tells us how important that is. And we're building an organization to help with that process all across Pennsylvania, not just in certain parts of it. And that's going to be critically important. And one of the things that I know we're going to work on this year is we're going to grab clipboards, and we're going to go to where people are, like Khadija said, and get registered, sign up voters, young voters, folks that haven't ever registered to vote before. We're going to be on college campuses. I personally think we should be talking to high school kids that are getting ready to graduate. Meet them at their high schools and get them signed up earlier. We don't have to wait for them to go to college. They're old enough to vote too. And so we need to have a lot more activity on the ground with clipboards, signing, having them fill out those voter registration forms. Call it old school, but it's effective, and not just rely on digital part, hoping that people go and sign up on a website, even though it's easy to do.
And that
So I'm going to
takes
shut
us-
up.
Okay.
And I know there's a lot of
Well,
questions.
That leads us right into the questions I have, because voting involves both registration, because you need more voters, and then getting those registered voters to turn out. What areas, in your view, are really ripe to register more voters? You hear debates within the party about whether you should go to areas that have a lot of Democrats, whether you should go to areas where there are fewer Democrats. What, from each of your organization's perspective, what areas do you consider ripe to register more voters? And I'm going to start with you, Kadita.
Thanks, Jill. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're laser focused on communities of color and youth voters in this moment. And we look at Pennsylvania and we're seeing the census, details. And we know that Pennsylvania is just about 25% folks of color. What we also know is that African Americans, Black folks, we have been consistent supporters of the Democratic Party for a very long time. And we also know other communities of color, and we're talking about the Latinx communities, API communities. Also, a great opportunity for us to get some progressive folks elected into office so we can move progressive legislation. We talk about Pennsylvania. I tell you that 20% of all Black folks who are eligible to vote are not registered. 31% of all Latinx folks who are eligible to vote are not registered. 42% of all API folks who are eligible to vote are not registered. That is a lot of people. We also are going to focus on what they consider the new American majority, and that's white women under the age of 40 who are unmarried. So when we talk about reaching folks where they are, this is the demographic that we're looking to spend our time and efforts, because we know that there's a gap in the Commonwealth. This is a large state, 67 counties. There are lots of grassroots organizations who have been doing this work for a very long time. And we know that we could have 67 grassroots organizations in one county and it's still not enough. So we're looking to fill the gaps that exist. And so when I talked about the regions in which we're looking to move into and to mobilize constituents, that's what we've identified through our research as where we can be most effective, particularly as we get into 2022. Norristown, we spent a lot of time in Norristown, Montgomery County. Turnout 10%. Turnout 10%. And if we're looking at elections that are won, presidential elections that are won by 80,000 votes, or if we're looking at magisterial judicial elections that are won by 17 votes, we need to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote is out here. And we know that those who are most recently registered to vote are the least likely to actually show up to the polls. And so it's not enough to stand outside a grocery store. It's not enough to go at a tabling event at a Pride or a multicultural event and register folks to vote. Those folks are not going to show up to the polls. So when we're engaging these folks to register them to vote, we must stay engaged with them, continue this process year round, not just 2 months ahead of an election, and stay within these communities so that there's a reason for them to actually turn out and vote twice a year. So that's what we've identified, and that is our model and how we want to continue this work going into 2022 and beyond. Meeting people where they are at their doors. I can tell you, as we knock on doors in Norristown, in Carlisle, Cumberland County, in Monroeville, Penn Hills, people are not used to seeing anyone at their door talking to them about these issues. These are the gaps we've identified. And if we don't reach these folks, we're going to lose them. And we're going to lose generations of voters as well as the children that they're raising in these households who will also not become voters. So we have our work cut out for us.
Do you want to add to that, Jamie or Mitch?
So one thing that I'd say is that, we have our work cut out even in places like Philadelphia, right? One of the things that Pennsylvania and Pennsylvanians need to be aware of is that there is no longer an election day. That ended in 2019 when they passed vote by mail as a new form of voting. There's no longer an election day. There is a last day to vote, and there's an election period. And that election period is about 6 weeks long, depending on when ballots start to drop. So field work has to start way in advance of election day. And it's frankly, it starts now. We have to be communicating with people. We have to communicate way better in the Latino communities and in the African-American communities, and not just show up at their doorsteps when it's time to say, please vote for these candidates, right? We have to have conversations with people, but we also have to start it way sooner, knocking on doors. That's the best, that's the number one place to have the best political conversation is at somebody's doorstep. And we have to do more of that. And it's not, and we have to do it in areas from rural Pennsylvania down to our urban core. We can't assume anything anymore. And we can't assume that people are going to vote out. We have to talk to them.
Jamie, do you want to add to that? You're on mute. You're on mute.
You're calling me.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that, you know, about from them. You know, we're more on this spectrum of turnout. You know, we work to register voters when we see a need from like the county or from a candidate. But, you know, our focus for turn people, it was more of a turnout focus than a voter reg focus.
Great. What do your organizations find really effective in getting people registered? I know, Kadita, you spoke about some things, so did you, Mitch. You know, there's robocalls, there's door knocking, there's digital, there's, you know, people have said, get celebrities to a particular neighborhood, hang, you know, banners, put a sign on a car. What really is effective? And additionally, what can we do as volunteers to amplify those techniques that you are using? But I know there's been lots of talk about what is and what is not effective. And I know, Kadita, you spoke about personal conversations and maintaining those conversations as we go forward. But I'm interested in what you feel are the most effective techniques to engage with the voter.
Starting with me, Jill?
Yes.
Okay. The lessons learned out of Georgia was that, you know, there are Stacey Abrams in every neighborhood. Every block has a Stacey Abrams, and you have to identify that person because they are the trusted messenger. And we were talking about entering communities, particularly communities of color, who have been disengaged from the political process for so long and often ignored. We must approach them with folks who come from within their known neighborhoods as the trusted messenger to talk to them about the issues of their neighborhood, to then get them to register to vote and then turn out. And so although we're grateful to folks from Massachusetts and all the other places that swarm into the state, you know, weeks ahead of an election, nobody is going to be the better trusted messenger to register someone in the community than someone from within that community. And so the ways in which we are getting folks who have been outside the electorate to actually register to vote has been to talk about issues. And a lot of times, you know, I hope we're going to get into a messaging conversation as well, because a lot of times we think we know what we need to talk about to get someone registered to vote. And a lot of times we don't do enough listening and we do a lot of talking at. And we have made very big assumptions about what it is certain communities want to hear. And so pocketbook issues, you know, are important in all 67 counties. Right. So you don't have to just go to a Black community and talk about policing reform. We can go into Black communities that we could talk about education funding and not funding schools equally, because we all care about our children's education. We can go into Latinx communities and we can talk about the need to raise the minimum wage because we have employers who take advantage of their employees and continue to pay something that's not even close to a living wage. But yet we continue to want to go to that community and talk about immigration reform. Right. So we must talk about the pocketbook issues that are going to move folks and not make assumptions about what it is we think certain communities need to hear. And so when I was knocking doors in Carlisle, thank goodness I was with a volunteer from Carlisle who could talk about the fact that there was a nursing home that was about to be privatized. And that was the big to-do in Carlisle. I walk in there blind in Carlisle, not understanding that that is the big to-do in Carlisle. I'm not reaching people where they are. I'm not talking about the issues that matter to them. And so we must enter these communities with the trusted messenger to get them now to become involved in the electorate and then cast their ballots. So when we talk about what's been important, what's the thing that's moving people, it's what's happening in their neighborhood is what's moving them.
Kadita, I'm so glad, Kadita, that you said in regards to message, I'm so glad that you said listen, because first of all, everybody, you know, is I'm with the state party, right? Everybody's always asking, what's the message? What's the message? Well, part of the answer to that is you need to find out what the local message is. You know, Marian Moskowitz is the chair of the Chester County Commission, the first Democrat ever. And one of the reasons, in addition to her being an amazing individual and hardworking and all that, is when she started her campaign, the first thing she did was listened. So instead of us pushing what the message was, and some people assumed it was one specific issue, we asked the voters. And the voters gave us feedback that quite honestly surprised us during that race. But those were the messages that we communicated back to the voters and had conversations about those issues. And that's why she's sitting as the chair of the Chester County Commission right now. So it is really important that for any candidate or any organization, when you're organizing or you're running for a certain seat, you must understand in each specific district what local issues are important to folks, and don't make any assumptions. That's very important. And Jill, going back to the question of like, what's the best technique to use for like doing things like registering voters? You have to do a little bit of all of them. For any successful campaign, and quite honestly, registering voters is a campaign in itself, right? Any successful campaign, you have to do many things right. You can't just do television. You can't just knock on doors. You can't just mobile text. You can't just send mail. You have to do a little bit of everything, and you have to do them well. And so one of the things that we need to do with voter registration is to get more people actively engaged in it. Once upon a time, Democrats were the ones that owned registering voters, right? There were organizations that did it, and then it kind of dropped off. We have to go back to our roots. And one other thing, and this is really important. When you're registering somebody to vote, it's not enough to just get them to register to vote. There's a box in that form that gives them the option to vote by mail. Folks, the fact that we have this significant lead in vote by mail is absolutely unheard of. The Republican Party owned vote by mail in many states around the country for decades. And we have the one person we have to thank for this ridiculous lead that we have right now is the former Orange occupier. Because in April of 2020, when he dropped that first tweet that said vote by mail is fraud, he destroyed and dismantled one of the most effective weapons that the GOP had. Last year in 2020, I think we had a 70% to 30% advantage in vote by mail. Now, I know some people are purists and they want to go to the poll and they want to see their friends and and all those other things. That's fine. But for many people to have an option, it's significant. And Jamie Perry Potter will tell you that vote by mail is something that we all need to constantly focus on. So while we're signing up folks and registering them to vote, let's take away that second step of contacting them again and asking them to register vote by mail and say, hey, while you're filling that form out, check that box over there. And now you'll have an opportunity to choose how you're going to vote.
Jamie, do you want to add to that?
Well, I always want to add to that when we talk about vote by mail. So it is, I think the two things, like Mitch says, it's hand in hand, like you have the purists, like we ran a statewide vote by mail program for 2021. We worked with the party and, here's the revelation, write it down. When voting's accessible, more people do it. Like that's the secret of all of this. And that's what it was. Like, I don't know. And I'm a terrible number person. Mitch will always jump in for me, but what do we have? Like a 380,000 vote advantage, registration advantage over the Republicans. We're talking about the last election where you have 40% turnout tops, wherever we ended up. That's a lot of people who aren't voting, right? A lot of people, like, why aren't you voting? I mean, there's easy fixes like that. We have to make voting more accessible. And I think we've done that with vote by mail and we're working on it. And then there's huge things, like huge divides of things. And there's the uncomfortable things where, people don't vote when it doesn't matter. And if you're not being represented that way, and I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican, if your representatives are failing you, you don't have hope. And that's why we're all Democrats, because in some part of us, like, we have hope. There's something wrong with us half the time that we have so much hope because we always think everything is screwed up as it is. It has to be able to get better. And that's why we're all here. And that's why we do it. And the thing, what I have hope was vote by mail. So I can't wait to see when, Kadita started registering voters. Another reason we lost so many voters was COVID. Like we believed in it, they didn't, and our people are the people that move around. We couldn't find them, so it's different. Like I have hope in that. This program of the people who registered to vote by mail, wait for this, 50% of them did not vote in 2019. How about that? Because we talked to them, they were ready, they want to participate. We made voting accessible. This makes voting accessible. And one of the things that educating people about voting, like it doesn't seem like rocket science, but apparently it is. Sometimes they think we're Democrats, maybe we overcomplicate, but people understood the amount of provisional ballots that were cast in this 2021 election was amazing to me because we explained to them, if you didn't get your ballot, just go to the poll. Your poll workers will straighten it out. You will either turn in and vote on the machines or your provisional ballot, but you will vote today and you will, and that put a lot of these people over the edge. I mean, we spent down to the point where I can't make eye contact with my own treasurer over these school board races because it's horrible. And people realized what was happening in their community. They were, dumbstruck. I live in a nice place. If taxes are high, next thing you know, your kids, soccer coach is like CRT to ban all books that say Malala. And you're like, where do I live? And I think people are afraid. Like people cannot believe this stuff is on their front doorstep. Maybe it's the hope piece again. I don't know. Maybe it's not willful naive. I don't know what it is, misinformation, but people want to vote. And when we have these new voters, the other thing from our program that was so successful is we had an uptick on the general number for 18 to 30-year-olds. We know they're the white whale, the Moby Dick, the unicorn of everybody. Where are these 18 to 30-year-olds? It was easy for them to vote. They could do it from their phone. So they signed up. And when we teach them how to vote, as Kadita said, as Mitch said, twice a year, every year. And when Kadita signs them up to vote and says, now you vote twice a year, every year, fill this format, we'll mail it to you, do it twice. They don't know any different. They're not going to get, I see some of our volunteers are on here where you'd be like, I voted the polls. I voted at my same poll every single year, twice a year. And they're mad at you that you're suggesting that they can't vote. But some of our organizers, I was like, what do you think it is? And I don't think that younger people have such an attachment to the polling place as some of us who used to go with our parents and we used to do that. It's a whole different line of thinking. And the best part of it is the only joy we get sometimes is to watch the Republicans implode on themselves, and they blew it. They blew it on vote by mail. It was over 70-30 this time. And when you would see on Facebook, I torture myself and follow every Facebook page of every Republican I like to know what they're up to. And they would be like, last day to vote by mail. And they would get crucified by their own people who'd be like, how dare you? That's why Biden's here in the first place, turning on their own Republican Party. Voting accessibility, it goes hand in hand. It comes hand in bringing these new voters along that Kadita is bringing to us and teaching them how to vote. You vote every year by mail and it's accessible. And if you want to be one of the people that goes to polls, congratulations. It's a little bleak nowadays. I can see all the poll workers on here because all the Dems are voting by mail and you're there all day long. You're like, oh my God, what's happening? But it's a training. It's a habit, making voting a habit. We vote twice a year, every year. And when they get signed up, when they learn and when Kadita talks to them and says, hey, this is why you have to vote. You do it twice a year, every year. And that's what they learn. That's their voting habit. And that's what we need to enforce. It's all the pieces have to work together because we look how many people are not voting. That's a lot.
It is. I wanted to, so speaking of voters who didn't vote, we obviously just had an election where we faced some losses, in some of the counties as well as in Philadelphia. Turnout was lower than we would have liked in Philadelphia. What are your reasons for believing that turnout was low there? And what can we do to improve it going forward? Because we lost two statewide judicial races, in addition to losing school board races and some other municipal races in other counties.
Okay.
In my opinion, I'm sorry, Kadita, please go.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that I talked about a little earlier is organizing on the ground earlier. Field is hard, and field is a tough challenge, and it's sweaty and it takes time, but it works. And in communities like Philadelphia, you need to be talking to voters at their doors, and you have to bring them out. We call it knock and drag. It's like a insider term to getting people out to vote. I want to go back real quick and say that we can't rest. I saw somebody ask the question, does the GOP know that they blew it on vote by mail? The answer is, I'm sure there are people that do. Think about this, folks. Who were the ones who actually made sure vote by mail passed in 2019? It was the Republican-controlled legislature, right? I'm sure when Donald Trump tweeted in April of 2020 that vote by mail is fraud, they didn't know what to do. And so right now, he did such a phenomenal job, huge job, that he's got those voters brainwashed. And it's going to take them a long time to get them back to voting by mail. What we can't do is we can't take it for granted. And we also have to do everything we can, right, Jamie, to make voting by mail easier and more accessible, and not just rest on our laurels and say, we got a 70-30 advantage, let's call it a day. We have to keep promoting it. I saw somebody else say something about education. In 2020, this was remarkable. During the primary, the first time Pennsylvanians voted by mail, in some areas, I'm pretty sure Philadelphia and some other significant counties had a 30% fail rate on the vote by mail ballot returns, which means they were kicked back because they came in naked, they weren't signed, they did something wrong. So they had a 30% fail rate. People were panicking. Our people were panicking. It's like, we have to abandon this. We have to abandon this. We have to go back to tell them to vote on election day. But we still had COVID, right? So what we did was we spent a fortune on digital ads, and people were posting like crazy. God, I followed that hashtag Make It Ballot. I think it's a committee person of ours out in the Southeast. I loved what they were doing. And Jamie was sending out postcards saying, no naked ballots. Everybody was going on, and we bombarded everybody with making sure and educating them on the right way to vote by mail. And then look what happened in November. Frankly, vote by mail is what put Joe Biden in the White House. And the fact that we got the failure rate down to like minuscule percentage points, because we all worked very hard to educate people on, number one, turning those ballots in and doing it the right way.
Kadita, do you want to add into specifically with respect to Philadelphia? And I'm going to ask you to also answer something. I've seen a couple questions about this in the chat. Is in places that like Montgomery County, where turnout's very high, is it useful to have people from Montgomery County come in somewhere else to help turn out the vote or to help register voters, like say into Philadelphia? Or is it better to have sort of a trusted resident in that particular neighborhood do that, or a combination of both? And then also speaking to your thoughts on the Philadelphia turnout.
So I'll speak to Philadelphia turnout first. We have to give folks a reason to hit the polls. Something has to be exciting on that ballot. In Pittsburgh, there was something very exciting on the ballot. Your opportunity to put the first Black mayor, in power there in Pittsburgh. That drives turnout, right? We had a DA race here that wasn't sexy, right? We kind of already knew our primary races in Philadelphia is the general election for the most part. There was no reason for folks to come out to vote. And don't get me started on the fact that we have no idea about judicial elections, how they work, why it's important, who's on the ballot, why we should vote for judges. So if we want folks to turn out, we better put something on that ballot that drives them to the polls. Folks here that we're talking to and engaging, particularly communities of color, want to see themselves represented in the elected officials who are on the ballot. So we take Philadelphia, 2 Black women. We had the opportunity to put 2 Black women on the appellate courts. The appellate court currently has 1 person of color out of 31 judges. That's 4% of our appellate court judges is a person of color. We had an opportunity to put 2 Black women on the bench. But we're not talking about judicial elections in any meaningful way. We look what just happened in Wisconsin. That's a judge that was elected by the people, right? We have that same thing here in Pennsylvania where we elect our judges. The doors we're knocking on, people had no idea, not only that there was an election this last November, And they definitely didn't know that there was a judicial election going on and that they have the power to put a judge on a bench or not retain a judge. So we have to do a much better job. Someone put it in the chat box. We have to talk about civics. I mean, obviously, it's, we've taken a lot of things out of schools. Civics is one of those things. Great organizations, Pennsylvania Youth Vote, PA Youth Vote, educating folks about the issues that matter to the youth, right? So we're talking to the youth about education funding. They understand when one side of City Line Avenue is fully funded or close to fully funded, and the other side of City Line Avenue is in disarray. 17-year-olds get that. So we have to give folks these reasons to show up to the polls. If rapper Meek Mill probably knew that he could put the judge who made his life miserable on a bench or take that judge off the bench, perhaps Meek Mill would show up to the polls. Perhaps rapper Meek Mill would get folks who trust his message to actually show up to the polls to vote in judicial elections. We have work to do in educating the constituency of why it's important to show up to the polls, particularly in these quote unquote off-year municipal elections, because they impact our daily lives and not more than these federal elections. Part two of your question, Jill, you were talking about why are we not in certain other communities? Was that what that was?
Yeah, why, if in terms of getting both the message out, getting voters registered and getting voters out to the polls, does it make sense in communities with really high turnout to have those volunteers come into, say, Philadelphia? Or is it better just to have someone trusted within the community? I saw there were multiple questions about that on the chat. Should we go into Philadelphia if we live in Montgomery or Bucks County? Should we go into Allegheny County if we live in some of the surrounding suburban counties? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What are your thoughts on that?
It's what it makes sense, right? It's kind of what makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't recommend someone who lives in Narberth to knock on Chester city doors and think that's going to be effective. What can be effective, though, there are communities in Narberth or other surrounding areas of Chester City. I'm outside now, going outside. That makes sense. We can do damage by sending folks from outside of communities into communities who have been disenfranchised and disengaged in the political process, particularly if they're not trained up to have meaningful conversations with people. Because I'll tell you this, what's not going to work, knock on someone's door who hasn't voted in 30 years and say, your ancestors died for your right to vote, why aren't you voting? I'll tell you right now, that's a losing conversation. So if we're not training folks up to have these conversations to get people involved, we can do more damage than good. So, we're going to have that, there's people are saying this is going to be $1 billion election here in Pennsylvania in 2022. The B word has been thrown out about how much money is going to be spent here in 2022 in this election. And so we know we're going to have folks from all over the country flying in because Pennsylvania is going to be super important. It could determine the makeup of the Senate and who has the gavel, right? So there's going to be lots of money and people flying in wanting to do good. We just have to make sure that we're putting them in strategic places that make sense for communities so that we're not doing more damage than more good. We have the best intentions, right? We have the best intentions, but sometimes our best intentions are just not what's good for the particular communities in which we're trying to engage. So that's kind of where I leave that. I mean, we just have to do what makes sense for folks. If you're someone who's loving the postcards and the op-ed writing and those things, do that. If we can fund the Stacey Abrams of the neighborhood to knock on doors and collect $1,000 a month stipend to register her block, let's do that too. If we have the capacity to do that, let's do that. But let's do what's right or what makes sense for who we're trying to elect. I'm telling you right now, I love Mitch, and I love Jamie, and I love all the work y'all are doing. But let me tell you, when we're knocking on these doors, people have no idea who the D is and who the R is. I'm registering folks and they get to that check and they're like, what's a Democrat? What's a Republican? These are the conversations we're having. And sometimes just because the big D on our chest is not also helpful sometimes, because there's some folks out here who are not in love with both political parties in this moment. So we have to get folks engaged on what it is that's going to move them to the polls. And when you talk about what's working, right? When you talk about the fact that there's $7 billion sitting in a rainy day fund being held up by Republicans, that's something folks can understand and get them to vote the way they need to vote so we can move progressive policy through and get the people that are going to best represent communities elected. So we don't, I just want to put that out there, is that right now, people need to hear this. The doors we're knocking on, people are not in love with the D or the R in the moment, if they even know who the D or the R is.
I'm going to actually add to that. So there was, and I don't know if anyone saw this during the Biden campaign, there's a nonpartisan project called the Engagius Project. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but they interviewed a large group of Philadelphia Democrats during the Biden campaign, and they echoed exactly what you were saying, Kavita. They believe, because I wrote this down, that neither party would make a significant difference in their day-to-day lives, and they do not see the ballot box as a way to improve their lives. They felt it doesn't matter if Trump is president, it doesn't matter if Biden's president. It doesn't matter because they're still not going to be able to pay their rent or pay their bills, or it doesn't impact, they don't understand how an elected official, how politics impacts their day-to-day lives. And it was one of the most telling things, because I think we who are on the ground and doing this work make certain assumptions. How can you not see democracies at risk? How can you not see, education is at risk, the judicial system is at risk? Because this is not what people are focusing in on day to day. They're focusing more on how to get food on the table. So I think that, just echoing what you said, Kavita, it is really important. Jamie, do you want to speak to any of this as well?
I do, because one of the things, what we do is, we work through the campaign. So they're the community. Like everybody said, you have to have a community connection. You have to know what works and what doesn't work. So, Turn Pay Blue is what we do. We move people, but we're not in blue areas. We're not in Philly. We're not in wherever. We're in the purple areas. We're in the red areas. If we lost there, we're probably there. The worse it is, the longer we've been there. I mean, I met Jill long ago when I started with Horsham. I've been fighting in Horsham for a long time. They're just some tough nuts to crack. And, there are people who can make a difference in those communities, especially where they're under the yoke of a Republican who seems like a good guy. Oh, he's a good guy. He fills the pothole. He's a good guy. He does that. So there's lots of pieces to this, because like a lot of these conversations, when you talk about reaching voters where they are and things like that, where we go are already red. They have a Republican in the House, a Republican in the Senate, usually both. It is a different kind of conversation where you're trying to go into communities where especially now that we started working in rural PA, you don't want your neighbors to know. Like when we first started, in, I guess it was 2017 or 2018. It may have been out by where Jill is. I think it was even out by like Mulligari's district. People wanted to canvass, but they didn't want to do it in their community. So they were swapping because they didn't want their neighbors to know they were Democrats. For like the 2018, like, I can't knock doors in my community. What if my kid's teacher answers the door? Like being a Democrat was like a dirty word. Like that's what it is when we see. So literally they were swapping with each other. They were going to different townships in the hopes that they wouldn't run into anybody they know. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing. It's Pennsylvania. That's why all this, when we talked about Virginia, everyone's like, oh, what do you think about Pennsylvania? Everybody on this call, listening, talking, Planet Pennsylvania is like no other state in the United States. We are like, nobody has a candle to us. This is 3 states smushed together that have nothing to do with one another. There's a lot of different opinions. There's a lot of, diversity crammed into certain spots. The rest of this is like middle, and it's radio silent, where you got like, what do you have? Fox News and no broadband. And it's a really interesting place. But if you look at things about how much of Pennsylvania is vaccinated, is there anybody in there? Is there anybody? And it's everywhere. It's not leaving behind people in the rural counties. We do a lot with postcarding because it's the most accessible way to get people in to the process. Like they're nervous. Like you're not going to, if you're never volunteered before, you don't want to go knock on a door. You don't want to get some Trumper in your face or somebody who's like, what if you knocked on Khadijah's door and like, you don't know anything, like, what if I talk to this incredibly smart person and they think I'm stupid? We got to let people in. And we got 40,000 postcards that we gave out to like little committees that are trying to get things rolling, that are trying to bring their own volunteers, start their own community, because a lot of these places we have to start the community, and then a lot of others we have to repair the community, which I think would happen in Philadelphia. But, there's these Dems that are the little engines that are trying to bring, some sanity to where they live. And that's like the heartbreak of Bucks County. We all saw it. Those of us that work in Bucks, like, it wasn't a surprise. It was devastating, but like, could you say you were surprised? We knew it was bad. I don't know if everybody knew it was that bad, but it's tough. And, it's all hands on deck everywhere, doing everything. Just like Kadita and Mitch said, everything, find what works for you and just do it. Don't stay home. Just go. One of these options works for you somewhere, somehow.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd add, Jill, if I could,
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to just add a couple of things. Number one, one of the unfortunate things that's happened since, I don't know, 1991 or 1992, when James Carville made a joke and said that Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh and Philly and Alabama in the middle, it's not funny, and we actually, and people enabled that to continue because we stopped talking to people in rural Pennsylvania. Why would anybody vote for you if you don't have a conversation with them? So, I'm really glad that this year we did take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and we did start knocking on doors in rural Pennsylvania, that we did give collateral to our county parties to help support them in their efforts. Kadita's right. We need to have people that are from communities talking to people in those communities. Right now, this coordinated campaign, there's going to be a lot of money in Pennsylvania. The entire country is going to be watching what happens. So there are a lot of resources coming, and we are building a force on the ground. And I can tell you that the coordinated staff are hiring to the best of their ability. They are looking for local talent so that we can find good organizers in Philadelphia to organize in Philadelphia. We can find good organizers in Dauphin County and organize in Dauphin County. But the one thing that I will tell you is that the Pennsylvania Democratic Party isn't the secret bullet or the magic solution. We are not going to be able to do this alone. We need your organization. We need Jamie Parapato and Turn Pay Blue. Thank God Kadita's here and getting this organization off the ground. And there are indivisible organizations all over Pennsylvania. There's an organization here in Pittsburgh called Order of the Phoenix. Those folks are road warriors, man. They knock doors like crazy and make phone calls. They're workhorses. And we're also, training and recruiting people to run for committee seats, from local Democratic committee to state committee seats. We want more new, fresh blood. We don't want any seats unfilled. And so it's a constant work in progress for sure. I can promise you that for everything that happened and didn't happen this election cycle, there are people addressing those things right now that we're going to, work hard to make sure that we do boost things up in Philadelphia, that we do get, make it easier for folks out west to vote by mail, and everything in between. Nobody's taking a day off. Like, I don't even know what that means.
Mitch, I'm going to ask, because there have been a few questions about the state party, so I want to make sure, will there be enough funding for the state party to work in the counties where we need to get the voters out? There's a concern, I know, about money, and there's a concern about places like, for example, someone mentioned Scott Perry, and they don't have enough people to door knock. Will the state party provide both financial resources and bodies to, and I know obviously other organizations are assisting you in your work, but will the state party itself be providing what is needed in terms of warm bodies and dollars to do this?
So the state party is actively fundraising. What's interesting is there are many people that are political contributors, but usually they contribute to a political candidate, right? So frankly, being an organization like the Democratic Party, it's not easy to raise money. For an issue like Jill, like you just mentioned, that race against Scott Perry, who if he's not let out in handcuffs, we need to defeat him at the polls. But, that's going to be a very active congressional campaign, and there will be a lot of money, I'm sure, going into that congressional campaign. There will be campaigns that will be, that will build organizations in addition to what we all build, our organization. Jamie is growing Turn PA Blue. Kadita's organization is growing, hopefully. Everybody needs resources and funding. And I promise you, like as Kadita pointed out, we're expecting a significant amount of money in Pennsylvania. And I'm just happy with the fact that there is no plan that says we're only organizing in 12 counties, right? They are organizing statewide. And if some of you on this Zoom session are from rural counties, we are there. We're there in many ways, and we are growing.
Right. On our Zoom tonight is David Broida, who's very interested in this issue, and he wanted to ask a question. So David, I'm going to let you actually ask the question as opposed to putting it in the chat. He's one of the original founders of DJOK.
Thank you, Jill. Actually, it's not a question. I'd just like to follow up on the things that Kadita said and maybe offer a couple ways forward. In Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, 67 counties, the average voting percentage in this last election in November was about 30%. Philadelphia voted at 18%. If Philadelphia had voted at 25 or 30%, we would have won the statewide offices. We know where the people who aren't voting are and how to get them to vote. The second example is Montgomery County. There's 62 municipalities in Montgomery County. The municipality, and Kadita, you'll know this, that had the highest percentage of voting for Biden in 2020 at 85 or 86% was Norristown. Norristown was also the municipality that had the lowest percentage of registered voters actually voting and the lowest percentage of eligible voters registered. So we know where we can win elections. We have to find these voters. And my solution is in South Philadelphia. I was there recently. There's a banner across 10th Avenue, 10th Street, and it says, get the COVID vaccine now. We should have banners up there, vote now. We should be creating a culture where voting is part of your life. It should be door to door. It should be banners. It should be social media. It should be Oprah Winfrey and Michael Jordan and everybody doing public service announcements on radio, television, social media. Those are the things that I'd like to see. And I imagine, Kadita, that those are things you're probably working on already. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anyone would like to comment?
Jill, if I can just thank you, David, for your comments. And yes, we have to make this a cultural shift. I think about all the events you've all attended in the last few months that didn't have any voter registration. We got people standing in line to get vaccinated for 45 minutes for it to be their turn. Why isn't someone out there with a clipboard registering voters at the vaccination sites? All these events that have popped up during the summertime, every single event that you go to, somebody should be there with a clipboard registering voters. It's just, we have to make that part of the culture. And we just have to be talking about the importance of voting every time. It's going to be the only way. We're going to have to register more folks to vote if we're going to have success in 2022. Otherwise, we already know what's in jeopardy, that our democracy is in peril. We have our work cut out for us. I just want to say this. We can do a lot. Organizations, Jerry Parapato, she's doing amazing things. Mitch Cate's doing amazing things. And we cannot out-organize strategic efforts to disenfranchise and suppress votes. We cannot out-organize gerrymandering, right? We can't out-organize that. So as we're also registering folks to vote, we also need to be fighting for our voting rights in federal legislation. Talk about the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act. I'm talking about Freedom to Vote Act, the ending of the filibuster. I mean, there's only but so much grassroots organizations can do. Let's really be honest with this. It's time for legislation to protect us because our voting rights are in peril.
I agree. As we finish up this call, we could discuss this for another hour because there is so much work to be done and everything that you have all said is so important. But Kadita is 100% correct. While so many people have been focused on the infrastructure bill, really the most important infrastructure we have is the right to vote. And more important in many ways than the infrastructure bill are the two voting bills that are stalled in the Senate. And because of the filibuster, we have unable to get them passed. So I would urge everybody on this call to call your US senators and tell them to end the filibuster and to get these voting bills passed, because Kadita's right, you can't outrun disenfranchisement when they're attempting to disenfranchise us, and they're attempting to do it as well in the PA state legislature. Whether, one of the things I found out today is they want to move the May primary to August because they believe there's quote unquote, and when I say they, the GOP, there's voter fraud, which we know is BS. So work needs to be done at the very local level. We need to get more people into committee positions. We need more people on school boards. We need to get people into state House and state Senate races. We need to hold our congressional seats because we are going to lose one, and we need to flip the Toomey seat into a Democratic one. I urge you to please support the new PA project, Term PA Blue, and the PA State Party. I urge you to volunteer, if you don't already, with your local Democratic committee. There's been information put up in the chat about how you can donate and how you can volunteer for these organizations. We are at an all hands on deck moment. If we don't win this battle, not only will we lose our majority, we're at risk for losing democracy. I hate to put it in those stark terms, but that is where we are as we approach 2022. So I want to thank again our speakers, Mitch Cates, Jamie Parapato, Kadita Kenner. I want to thank Martin again for helping Martin Rappel of our board to help from Bucks County, who helped organize this event. And thank you for being here this evening. And there will be a recording of this event that will be sent to all attendees. Thank you and good night.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Oh, yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
And thank you, Jill.
To end on a positive note, happy Thanksgiving.